Number 10. The mammal that went down. Fighting a dinosaur. For a long time, the standard picture of the dinosaur world put mammals at the bottom. Small, nervous, hiding in the shadows, while reptiles ran on everything that mattered. Then, paleontologists found a fossil in northeastern China that broke that image in the most violent way possible. It showed a stocky mammal called Repenomamus, locked in combat with a plant-eating dinosaur called Psittacosaurus, not feeding on a carcass afterward. Fighting it. The fossil came from rocks about 125 million years old in Liaoning province, part of the famous Johol biota, a fossil-rich system shaped by volcanic activity, ash falls, and fast burial. That setting matters because it helps explain why this moment survived at all. The two animals were preserved in direct physical contact. Repenomamus was on top of the dinosaur. Its teeth were near the ribs. Its hind limb was hooked around the prey. The dinosaur was down on its side, still tangled with the attacker. Researchers argued this was not a random pileup. It was a snapshot of active struggle, cut short by disaster. That is what makes the case so strong, as an opening hook. The fossil does not just preserve death, it preserves a broken assumption. Repenomamus was not one of the giant mammals that came later after the dinosaurs were gone. It lived right in their world, and in this case, it was aggressive enough to attack one. The likely ending came fast. A debris flow, probably triggered by nearby volcanic activity, appears to have buried both animals during the fight. The attacker did not get to finish the kill. The victim did not get away. The landscape erased them both at once. The mechanism is simple and brutal. One animal misjudged the risk or decided the risk was worth it. Then the environment ended the contest before biology could. That is a recurring pattern in the fossil record. Some of the most disturbing prehistoric deaths come from moments when violence and sudden burial overlap perfectly. You get not just bones, but behavior. Not just a dead animal, but the exact position of its last bad decision. And once you see one fossil preserve a fight in progress, the next step is obvious. Because the next case is not just another struggle. It is one of the most famous death snapshots in paleontology, and it looks like prehistory froze two dinosaurs at the exact second neither could let go. Number 9. The fighting dinosaurs. Few fossils hit as fast as this one. A velociraptor has 1 foot raised, its sickle claw driven upward. A protoceratops has its jaws clamped down on the predator's arm. They are still tangled together, locked in a killing exchange that never finished. It is one of the clearest examples in all of paleontology of death arriving in the middle of a fight. The specimen was found in the Gobi Desert of Mongolia, in rocks of the Jadokta Formation, dating to roughly 74 million years ago. It was discovered in 1971 by a Polish-Mongolian expedition, and it immediately stood out because this was not a scattered bone bed or a partially guessed scene. The posture of the skeletons told the story directly. Velociraptor's curved killing claw was positioned against the throat region of Protoceratops. Protoceratops was still biting down on the attacker's right forelimb. Neither animal had disengaged. Neither animal had fed. There was no cleanup stage here, only impact, struggle, and interruption. The leading explanation is sudden burial, most likely from a collapsing sand dune or sand flow. That interpretation fits the desert environment and explains why two fighting animals could remain articulated and locked together instead of being torn apart by scavengers. This is where the fossil becomes more than dramatic. It becomes informative. It shows that Velociraptor's famous claw was not just decoration. It was in use. It also shows that Protoceratops was not helpless prey. It fought back hard enough to trap its attacker, even as both animals were dying. That tension is what gives the specimen its staying power. It is not simply predator versus prey. It is mutual catastrophe. Each animal had enough force to damage the other, and then the environment finished the job. Prehistoric death often worked that way. Teeth and claws started the story. Sand, water, ash, or mud ended it. And that pattern matters for the rest of the countdown. Because some of the worst deaths in prehistory were not clean kills at all. They were collisions between attack, accident, and bad timing. The next fossil proves that even catching your meal could be the first step toward becoming one. Number 8. The pterosaur that caught a fish and got caught itself. Some prehistoric deaths look less like a clean predator kill and more like a chain reaction that went wrong in seconds. That is what makes one fossil from southern Germany so effective. It appears to show a flying reptile called Rhamphorhynchus catching a fish near the surface, only to be grabbed in turn by a larger predatory fish called Aspidorhynchus. For a moment, 3 different lives were tied together in one violent mistake. Then, all of them went down. The fossil came from the Solnhofen limestones of Bavaria, a late Jurassic deposit famous for preserving delicate details in extraordinary clarity. Rhamphorhynchus still had a fish in or near its jaws. Aspidorhynchus was linked directly with the pterosaur in a way that suggested active interaction, not a random collision after death. Researchers argued that the pterosaur likely seized the fish first, then got snared by the larger predator when the situation collapsed. The mechanism is simple and vicious. Rhamphorhynchus hunted close to the water, skimming or snatching prey near the surface. That made it vulnerable for exactly the moment needed. Aspidorhynchus was a fast predatory fish, but its jaws were probably not designed to swallow a pterosaur whole. The likely scenario is not that it neatly ate the flying reptile. It attacked at the wrong angle, got entangled, and dragged the entire mess downward. One hunt turned into 2 failed hunts at once. That is why the fossil lands so hard. Nobody in the scene truly wins. The pterosaur catches its fish and dies for it. The larger predator tries to exploit the moment and may have doomed itself too. This is not a clean food chain diagram. It is prehistoric chaos, preserved mid-collapse. And if that already sounds like a brutal final meal, the next case is even more direct. Because the next fossil does not just suggest a feeding accident. It preserves an animal that seems to have died because it swallowed the wrong thing and could not survive what came next. Number 7. The fish that choked on its last meal. Most predators die from being hunted, injured, starved, or overwhelmed by the environment. This fish may have died from a single catastrophic bite. In an early Jurassic fossil from Germany, paleontologists found a large, bony fish called Pachycormus, with an ammonite shell lodged inside it, in a way that appears to record a fatal feeding mistake. It is one of the clearest examples in the fossil record of an animal dying, because the meal it tried to take was simply too much. The specimen came from the Posidonia shale, another famous German deposit known for preserving marine life in remarkable detail. The ammonite was not lying randomly near the skeleton. It was inside the fish. That point is crucial. Researchers argued that the shell had been ingested while the fish was alive, and that the event was likely lethal. Pachycormus may have targeted soft tissue from an ammonite carcass or attacked the animal directly and swallowed more of the shell than it could manage. The result was the same. A meal turned into a blockage, an injury, or a choking event that the fish could not recover from. The mechanism is the story. A predator made one wrong calculation. It tried to force down prey that was too awkward, too sharp, or too structurally dangerous to pass safely. Modern animals do this too. Snakes choke on oversized prey. Fish die with meals jammed in their throats or stomachs. What makes this Jurassic case so powerful is that the failure was preserved clearly enough to read millions of years later. That gives the fossil a different kind of brutality. There is no dramatic duel, no giant predator, no sweeping disaster. Just one irreversible mistake at feeding sprung speed. The body was built to hunt, but not every hunt ends in control. Sometimes a predator dies because instinct keeps going one bite longer than the body can handle. And if one prehistoric hunter died from taking the wrong meal, the next case scales that same nightmare up into something far worse. Not fish versus shell, but sea monster versus sea monster. Number 6. The sea monster that swallowed another monster and died. At some point, prehistoric feeding behavior stops looking like predation and starts looking like overconfidence on a massive scale. That is what makes one Triassic marine reptile fossil so memorable. Paleontologists found the remains of a large ichthyosaur-like predator called Guijuichthyosaurus, with the body of another sizable marine reptile still inside it. This was not a small fish or a soft-bodied prey item. It was the trunk of a thalattosaur, a long-bodied reptile large enough to turn the last meal into a fatal event. The fossil came from southwestern China, from rocks about 240 million years old. The prey remains were preserved in the gut region, and the size relationship was extreme enough to make the scene instantly legible even to non-specialists. Researchers argued that the predator had bitten off or swallowed a huge section of the other reptile and then died soon after. The prey had not been fully digested. That detail matters because it pushes the timing of death very close to the act of feeding. Here's the mechanism. A predator this large could attack big animals, but swallowing large prey creates its own risks. The body can be stressed mechanically. Internal tissues can be damaged. Breathing and swimming can be compromised. In this case, scientists pointed to damage in the neck region that may have been linked to the fatal sequence. In other words, this was not just a giant animal eating another giant animal. It was a case where the act of taking the meal may have broken the hunter itself. That is what makes the fossil feel so brutal. Scale does not create safety. It creates new ways to die. A marine predator, powerful enough to seize another reptile, still pushed too far and paid for it immediately. The food chain did not simply move upward toward stronger and stronger animals. It carried the same risk upward too. The bigger the attempt, the bigger the possible failure. And once you see a sea monster die because it tried to swallow too much, the next case lands in a very different way. It is not about hunting at all. It is about one of the most dangerous biological moments any vertebrate can face, and a fossil that seems to have captured it at the worst possible second. Number 5. The mother sea reptile that died giving birth. Predators, storms, and feeding accidents explain many prehistoric deaths. This one appears to have come from the body itself. In a fossil from the early Triassic of China, researchers found a marine reptile called Chaohusaurus, preserved with embryonic remains positioned in a way that strongly suggests the mother died during labor. One embryo was still inside the body. Another was partly emerged and trapped in the birth canal. A third lay nearby. It is one of the clearest prehistoric snapshots of death in the act of giving birth. The specimen dates to roughly 248 million years ago, making it especially important because it comes from an early stage in marine reptile evolution. Cheohusaurus was part of the ichthyosaur line, a group that would later become fully adapted ocean predators. But this fossil shows something deeper than anatomy. It records a reproductive crisis. The alignment of the embryos is what gives the case its force. This was not a random association of bones. The young were positioned exactly where you would expect them if birth was underway when the mother died. That detail turns the fossil into more than a tragic curiosity. It preserves one of the oldest direct windows into live birth in marine reptiles, and one of the oldest examples of birth itself becoming fatal in the fossil record. The mechanism is painfully familiar even now. Labor can stall. A fetus can become trapped. The mother can weaken too fast to survive the complication. In a prehistoric sea with no help coming, that threshold would have been absolute. This case hits differently from the others because the violence is internal. There is no attacker and no visible struggle against an outside force. The body is doing what it must do to continue the species, and that same process becomes lethal. That makes the fossil feel especially cold. A predator can fight. An animal caught in a storm can try to escape. But a mother dying mid-birth is trapped inside the event that kills her, and that changes the rhythm of the countdown in exactly the right way. The fossil record does not just preserve brutality from claws and teeth. It preserves brutality from biology itself. The next cases push outward again into weather, ambush, and catastrophe. But this one stays powerful because it proves prehistoric death did not always come from enemies. Sometimes it came from the most basic act of life continuing. Number 4. The hatchlings. Torn out of the sky by a Jurassic storm. Not every brutal prehistoric death came from teeth. Some came from weather at exactly the wrong moment. In 2025, paleontologists described 2 pterodactylus fossils from southern Germany that appear to preserve one of the coldest kinds of disaster in the fossil record. These were hatchlings, fragile enough to fit in the palm of a hand, and both seem to have died after violent tropical storms shattered their wings and dropped them into the lagoon below. The fossils came from the Solnhofen limestones of Bavaria, a late Jurassic environment famous for preserving delicate animals in extraordinary detail. Both young pterosaurs showed similar breaks in the upper wing bones, especially the humerus, and the fractures matched extreme force rather than slow decay after burial. Researchers argued that storm damage was the most likely cause. These were babies destroyed by weather before they had much chance to survive. The mechanism is brutally simple. Hatchling pterosaurs were light, vulnerable, and dependent on flight structures that could fail under enough stress. A strong tropical storm could lift them, slam them, or send them tumbling into water, where broken wings meant there was no recovery. Once they hit the lagoon, drowning or rapid exhaustion would have followed quickly. Then came the second stage of the disaster. The same quiet, low-oxygen conditions that preserved other Solnhofen fossils also locked these 2 deaths into stone. That is why this case lands so hard. You do not need a giant predator when the environment itself can act with the same finality. Two young animals survived long enough to hatch into a dangerous world, only to be erased by a storm, powerful enough to snap bone and end flight in seconds. And once the fossil record starts preserving deaths caused by the sky itself, the next case takes us back to a predator attack, but one preserved in a way that feels almost surgical. A single wound in the neck, with no sign the victim ever had time to heal. Number 3, the giant flyer, with a croc's tooth in its neck. A juvenile pterosaur is moving along the edge of a Cretaceous waterway when something lunges upward and hits the neck hard enough to leave a hole in the bone. That is the story paleontologists pulled from the fossil of a young Cryodracon boreas from Alberta, Canada. The animal was enormous, even as a juvenile, part of a giant Ajdarchid lineage built for life on land and in the air. But all that scale meant very little if a crocodilian caught it at the wrong angle. The key evidence was a puncture wound in a neck vertebra. It was narrow, deep, and shaped in a way that matched the teeth of a croc-like predator better than the local theropod dinosaurs. More important, there was no sign of healing. That point matters because it places the damage right at the edge of death. The wound did not happen months earlier. It happened during the final event, or immediately after. Researchers could not prove every second of the attack, but the broader conclusion was strong. A crocodilian likely bit the pterosaur in or near the neck, and the encounter either killed it directly or marked it for immediate death. This fossil works so well late in the video because it compresses prehistoric brutality into one precise detail. Earlier cases showed whole-body struggle, failed feeding, birth trauma, and storm destruction. Here, almost everything hangs on a single impact point. One bite, one bone. No recovery. It feels less like a battle scene and more like an ambush caught one frame too late. That is what makes the fossil so effective. It reminds you that many prehistoric deaths were probably just this fast. No long chase, no heroic resistance. Just a predator exploiting position and timing better than the victim could react. Even a giant flyer could come down that quickly. And the final part of the countdown goes even further. Because the next fossils do not just preserve individual disasters. They preserve deaths so extreme, they start to feel like the last minutes of entire worlds. Number 2, the fish within a fish. Some fossils are powerful because they need almost no explanation. You look at them once and the death is already there. That is why the famous Xiphactinus specimen from Kansas belongs this high in the countdown. Inside the ribcage of the giant predatory fish is another fish, nearly intact, preserved as its final meal. It is one of the clearest prehistoric examples of a hunter dying almost immediately after swallowing something it could not safely handle. The predator was Xiphactinus, a fast marine fish from the late Cretaceous western interior seaway. The prey inside it was Gillicus, a large fish preserved almost whole inside the attacker's body cavity. The specimen is often called the fish within a fish fossil, and the reason is obvious the second you see it. Death followed so quickly that the prey remained largely undigested. That timing gives the fossil its punch. Something went badly wrong just after the swallow. Researchers have suggested a few possibilities. The prey may have thrashed enough to damage internal organs. The predator may have ruptured something while forcing such a large body down. It may also have simply misjudged the physical limits of its own anatomy. Whatever the exact sequence, the result is clear. The hunt succeeded, the feeding happened, and then the predator died before the meal had time to break down. This case lands so hard because it combines scale and overreach in the worst possible way. Xiphaxtinus was not fragile. It was a top predator built to seize large prey in open water. But being built for big kills is not the same as being immune to bad decisions. The fossil record keeps showing that prehistoric violence did not only punish the weak, it punished overreach. And if this specimen looks like a private disaster frozen inside one body, the final case is much larger. It may preserve not just one fish dying, but the first minutes of a planetary catastrophe. Number 1. The fish that died on the day the dinosaurs died. At a site in North Dakota called Tanis, paleontologists uncovered a deposit so extreme that it appears to record the opening moments of the end Cretaceous mass extinction. Fish were piled together in chaotic positions, slammed inland by a violent surge, then buried fast enough to preserve extraordinary detail. The reason this case belongs at number 1 is not simply that the animals died badly. It is that they may have died on the actual day the world changed. The broader event is well known. About 66 million years ago, the Chicxulub asteroid struck what is now Mexico and triggered the mass extinction that ended the age of non-avian dinosaurs. What makes Tanis extraordinary is the claim that it captures the near-immediate aftermath far from the impact site. The leading interpretation is that seismic waves from the strike triggered a massive seiche, a violent inland surge in connected waterways that tossed fish and debris together with overwhelming force. The animals did not die gradually in a collapsing ecosystem weeks later. They may have died within minutes to hours of the impact itself. That is where the fossil evidence becomes almost surreal. Some of the fish appear to have tiny, glassy impact spherules lodged in their gills, particles that would have fallen from the sky after the strike. If that interpretation is correct, these animals were alive as debris from the asteroid impact was still raining down. They were breathing in the fallout, while the water around them was already turning into a kill mechanism. This is what makes Tanis the perfect final payoff. Every earlier case preserved a hunt, a biological crisis, or a deadly weather event. Tanis scales that pattern all the way up. The killer is no longer one predator, one storm, or one bad decision. It is a planetary collision. Yet the fossil evidence still comes back to the same intimate level. Fish gasping, bodies thrown together, a final struggle, trapped in sediment before decay could erase it. There is still debate around some details of Tanis, and that matters. The strongest way to read the site is not as total certainty, but as unusually powerful evidence for a catastrophic death assemblage tied extremely closely to the Chicxulub event. Even with that caution, the implication is staggering. These fossils may preserve the first chapter of the day. Prehistory's most famous world ended. That is the larger pattern across all 10 cases. The most brutal fossils are not always the biggest predators or the bloodiest wounds. They are the fossils that hold timing. A mammal attacking a dinosaur before both are buried. Two dinosaurs locked in combat under sand. A pterosaur dying because one hunt pulled in a second predator. Fish choking, sea monsters overreaching, mothers dying in labor, hatchlings smashed by storms, a giant flyer dropped by one perfect bite, a predator killed by its own meal, and fish dying while impact debris fell through the sky. The fossil record is full of bones. The rarest fossils preserve consequences, And those are the ones that make prehistory feel least like deep time and most like a place where death could arrive in one terrible instant.